I'm going to walk very quickly through our security vision and strategy, and then we're actually going to have someone walk you through more specifically on the NSX side and what we're doing in the network security realm. And we're going to have someone stand up and talk a bit more in depth on what we're doing in the workload and compute side, but I'll try to paint the larger picture. Now, security in general is becoming a huge area of investment and focus for us. And the reasons for that are really twofold. One of them has to do with this is a huge growth area for us. I mean, we actually, between NSX, a very substantial portion of network virtualization is really being used for security use cases. Obviously, things like microsegmentation. The work that we're doing in app defense on the workload side is obviously entirely focused on security. And the work that we're doing in Workspace ONE, a pretty meaningful portion of that is being applied to sort of device and user security use cases. So today, between $1 and $2 billion of VMware's revenue is security-focused use cases. The second is, that ultimately the future value of things like hypervisor and things like the mobile device management, the future value of that is increasingly going to be in things like security and simplifying management. As opposed to the traditional value of those points, which were mostly about optimizing the compute resources of those platforms. So I don't know whether to step in and out of frame here and to do these. Okay, look, it's an understanding what we're doing. It's helpful to understand what problems we sought after to solve. And we really saw 5 main issues in the security field. One is that security is bolted on today. And what we mean by that is, you build infrastructure not knowing what applications are going to run on top of it. So you try to build it to support a variety of different kinds of application architectures. Then you go and you build applications, and those applications, they're iterating very, very fast today, especially as we move to DevOps. And then we tell security to go secure this. That is a very difficult position to solve this problem from. It's not architected in, it's bolted on, right? The second issue, if we go to the next slide, is that security today is very reactive, right? And what we mean by that is most of security is technologies that are looking to try to find attacks, malware. They're trying to find out the malicious behavior that's going on this. And this is a never-ending problem, and arguably, what you aspire to be is not too far behind, right? You're constantly catching up with millions and millions of threats, and that is evolving by the thousands every single day. So it's very reactive. The third problem that we kind of saw today is that security is really fragmented. And here's your choices. There are thousands of products, but actually the number that actually is even more significant is that the average organization owns 50 of these. And that means not just 50 products to own, manage, it means 50 different versions of the truth. It means 50 policy sets to reconcile. And candidly, and I spent a lot of time on the road with security teams, when you look at incidents that have happened, it's far more likely that people talk about misconfiguration and misalignments of controls than I didn't own this product. Right? Complexity is half the problem. The next problem that we sort of saw is that security is asymmetric. And what we mean by that is defense is harder than offense, right? They throw 1,000 arrows at you. They only have to land 1. You have to stop 1,000. And the way of thinking about this is when you're fighting an asymmetric battle, right, you try not to fight this in an open field, right? What you try to do in an asymmetric battle, if you just click again, is you try to constrain the problem so that the advantages of numbers don't mean as much, right? So that's, I think, an area that starts to shift security tremendously as well. And the last problem that we really see is that security today is very infrastructure-centric. You have endpoint security that focuses on anything that might generically show up on that endpoint. You have network security that somewhat generically focuses on everything that might pass that network link. And here's the problem with that. If I might just use a metaphor quickly, if I'm trying to protect my family and my home, if someone, what you'll find is in the middle of the night, if you sort of keep clicking through, is that I'll lock my perimeter of my house. I'll close various doors in my house. The lights will be off in most of the rooms in my house. Some rooms will be locked. I don't lock every room. It would be an unlivable place if I had to lock every single room in the house. But if someone manages to evade my perimeter and makes a noise inside the playroom in the middle of the night, I immediately understand that's not right and I react. It's very difficult for someone to it's not just a question of break in, but maneuver inside my house. And this advantage in my home comes from the fact that I understand my family and how my family uses my house, right? This is where you have advantage. But what happens is, in our world, we don't take advantage of that, right? If I were, please, if you click through, in our house, you know, keep clicking, I'm sorry, Jeff. In our house, every light is on, every door is open, right? We actually don't understand the family, or in our case, our applications and how our applications use our data center. So these are not playrooms or courtyards or bedrooms. These are all generic rooms, maybe of different sizes or capacities, but they're just all generic rooms. We don't even lock the perimeter of a house, right? In our data centers, we tend to be very, very infrastructure centric. So what that would look like, if I keep unnecessarily pulling on this same analogy, is that we look at the city, and we look at the perimeter of the city, we look at the roads, and we look at endpoints or rooms. Those are the endpoint security, the network security, and my perimeter security. So we have lost all context about how the family uses the home, how our applications use our infrastructure. This is an infrastructure-centric approach. Now, please, two frameworks that I think are very interesting that have driven a lot of our thinking for the last few years. One of them is a fantastic framework that Gartner developed called the Cloud Workload Protection Framework. And the gist of it was, if you stack rank all the things that you can do to protect a workload, in order of how much risk are you really getting rid of, the kinds of things that get rid of the bigger chunks of risk are things like patching, segmentation, application control, memory protection, system integrity, encryption. The common theme to them are they're about things that are about reducing attack surface. The kinds of things that are at the top of this pyramid are, well, the very top, antivirus, for example. Now, he's not saying that antivirus is not valuable, but he is saying that the relative risk inside a data center on a workload of antivirus is very small compared to some of these things. But if you look at where we spend our time and where the innovation in the industry has happened over the last 20 years, most of our innovation and investment has been in the top of this pyramid, as opposed to, you know, patching hasn't changed much in 20 years. Segmentation hadn't changed much before microsegmentation came along. And it's backwards. It's not where the bigger risks can be eliminated. That make sense? The second framework that I think is useful is Forrester's Zero Trust framework, which says you don't focus on infrastructure, you focus on applications and data, and then you think about how you shrink wrap things around that in terms of users that access those applications and data, devices, the network, and the workloads. But you center things and your policies around applications and data. As a result, a lot of what we're trying to do is say, think of security as two pieces. How do we get rid of attack surface versus how do you react to attacks? How do you focus both on applications and data as opposed to infrastructure? How your family is using the home? And a lot of what we're trying to do is solve for this bottom part of this. How do you reduce the attack surface? And how do we use our position to surface the application and data? Meaning, be able to look at our infrastructure through the lens of the application and data and shrink the attack surface around it. Does that make sense? That's the idea behind what we're trying to do. And I think if we do this well, we have an opportunity to make the most substantial difference, I think, in security ever. You know, I don't think people have traditionally thought of VMware as a security company. But I think if we solve for this problem, we could be the most important company in security, because this actually has the potential for the largest impact we've had on security, perhaps in the last couple of decades. So if we click the next phase, the big animal picture of this, the piece of the puzzle that I think we're in a unique position to solve is the fact that, if you click through, we're in a position both on the hypervisor and in terms of the mobile software that we've had through AirWatch and Workspace ONE, to have a layer of software that organizations around the world are already using, that is sitting in between infrastructure and applications. It actually understands how the two connect to each other. And what we've been working on is leveraging that abstraction layer to be able to understand the applications connected to the infrastructure. So the part of what we're doing is creating this sort of secure infrastructure, if you will. And if you click on this, the solutions that we've been building, NSX around the network, App Defense around the workload and application, Workspace ONE around users and devices, to be able to surface application and data context and then lock things down around it at a network level, at a workload level, at a user level, at a device level, shrink it, get rid of attack surface. Now that also adds value to the security products that people still use, whether it's endpoint security or network security. These things tend to be much more focused on how do I detect threats, but we can make them better because they can have the context of the applications and data, and they can use this infrastructure to insert and align themselves, and even use the infrastructure as a control point, as an enforcement point. Does that make sense? I don't know whether to go deeper. How are we on time? On our 15 minutes. I can go for another few minutes, but or if we're on time. Okay.
I did have a question.
Please.
Your comment about the hackers having an easier time, I think, is that how you said it?
They have the advantage. It's an asymmetric.
But I mean, the comment that you made that one woman I know, her name's Kate Pierce, she's in Australia, and she makes the point that you make about how you get, as the defender, you get to choose the playing field. So in my mind, that doesn't, the hackers or the malicious actors offensive, they don't actually have the advantage because you get to set them up, you know? So
yeah, so I guess
here's
the, and I don't know if I need to repeat the question because I don't know what's fixed on audio.
It's
oh,
okay.
You've got mics, okay. Yeah. It's a fair question. When focused on the attack and certainly the infiltration, the advantage is on the attacker side because they're the one.
They don't know what they're looking at, though.
So hold that thought just for a second, because a breach is multiple things. It's about getting in, it's about maneuvering to the asset that you're trying to get to or disrupt, and then completing that function, right? And in general, defense is harder than offense. And just in terms of penetrating, you don't know when an attacker is going to come in. You also, the threat vectors are constantly evolving. The one area you have the potential to have the advantage over the attacker is if you understand your environment and how you're using environment. Your comment about we have the opportunity to choose the playing field, that's true. But I would argue most people don't understand their playing field enough. They don't. The common question you would hear is, I don't understand. I couldn't tell you what applications we have. We have thousands of applications. I couldn't tell you which machines or servers are the app server of the patient care system. I'm looking at, as a result of the lack of context and the complexity and change inside an environment, people kind of back up and say, look, the only way I can look at this is from an infrastructure standpoint. I can see networks, I can look for threats and I can look for attacks. My comment earlier was simply that in that mode, the best we can achieve is to not be too far behind, to constantly be updating what to look for. The opportunity is to do exactly as you described, which is saying, look, if we really can choose our battlefield, if we actually understand our applications and data, and then we can say, you know what? Those applications are now in a least privilege mode. They can only talk to only who they need to for their purpose. They can only run the processes they need to for their purpose. Suddenly the attack surface is much smaller, and suddenly you're leveraging the one thing an attacker does not have, the context of how you specifically use your environment for your purpose. And then you're absolutely right. Then we're choosing the battlefield and we have the advantage. The question is operationally, how do we do that? In the past, that's been very difficult to do operationally because of lack of context and lack of control in our environment.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people forget about the foundations, and that's pretty much what allows us to get to that point, is understanding what our environment is and
It's fair.
what we
I guess
need.
my one pushback on that point is it's not simply a question of not knowing. It's that actually our environments have become so complex that it's very difficult traditionally to actually have that context or that visibility. I do think, though, the opportunity has suddenly is now here for that no longer to be an excuse. You know, this picture here as an example, virtualization as a layer has an opportunity to see what's running anywhere, but also what was provisioned there in the first place. What was the purpose of that thing, right? Virtualization is a position to do that without adding any agents, without adding any appliances. It has an opportunity to natively do that, which is less overhead, but also can't be turned off by an attacker. A virtual infrastructure is entirely automatable. So you have the opportunity to react in ways and in places you didn't previously have a react to go through. And so the idea behind some of the things, the way we've been using these concepts, to pull on the house analogy for a second, some of the work that we've been doing with App Defense, which you'll hear more about in a second, is to say, we'll take advantage of our position in the hypervisor. Please, yeah, keep going. We'll take advantage of our position in the hypervisor to actually tell you what each of those machines are for, what their purpose was. To be able to use that along with NSX to then microsegment so that you now have the system helping you and automating more of this process of doing that. And then the ability to adapt as this thing changes. The ability to lock down the workloads to say that they can only run what was intended. And that's what we've been doing in App Defense, and you'll hear more about in a second. And then the ability to use these things in combination, NSX for the microsegmentation, App Defense for locking down the workload, means that attackers that attack other parts of the infrastructure can't just move freely from one critical application to another. That's an example of this concept, please. It also means that if an attacker or a compromised user gets direct access to it, the workloads don't do more than intended. And then that starts to shrink the attack surface. You know, another comment that comes up is there's a backdoor into these microsegments, which is all the shared services that are involved. And again, locking down the workloads means that avenue is much smaller because it's hard for an attacker to make those shared services do things that they weren't intended to. And the last part, if we keep clicking, is the users getting access to these things. The question on that is, you know, to take this concept to the user and the device level is, does this person, please build it out, is this person have legitimately access? Are they on the invite list? Are they who they say they are? And are they coming from a device that we can trust? Right? That's taking this concept to the user and the device level. And so the work that we've been doing in Workspace ONE, if you go back just for a second, the work we've been doing in Workspace ONE is to address this part of the equation. Using Workspace ONE, which is the combination of the AirWatch technologies and the Virtual Identity Manager, to answer all of these as one question, at one statement, in one policy. So again, the common theme here is using the position on the user and the device and on the network and the compute side to give you understanding of your applications and data. And just as you were describing earlier, making that now this our home court, shrink wrapping that environment to do what it was intended and nothing more. And then that also helps the partner ecosystem so that they can do a more effective job of finding attacks. They're now solving a smaller problem, but they have context and they have the insertion point on it. And hopefully that starts to take this from that's where Workspace ONE, NSX, and App Defense, and we'll talk more deeply about two of these today. And hopefully this takes us from this mess that we talked earlier. And some of these things disappear into the infrastructure itself. And then some of these become the strategic security products that you still use, but they plug in and leverage this. And we're trying to do this not just within our own environments, but also from an end-to-end perspective, the stuff that you're seeing with NSX, to be able to apply this in the public cloud, in the private cloud, moving out to the edge, is really where we're trying to take this and essentially become a fabric that goes beyond just one environment, that starts to abstract not just hardware, but clouds.